Hello, our glorious gibbering fans.
We are Adventuresome Reviews.
Today, reviewing a sequel to a book we've read before with tragic success.
One of our most liked books.
Wind from the Wilderness is the original book, and today we are reviewing its sequel and the fourth book in the Watchers of Outremer series by Suzannah Rowntree, A Conspiracy of Prophets.
Which is just like a grand title.
Yeah. Well, all of her titles tend to be pretty good.
A Wind for the Wilderness was slightly boring, but A Conspiracy of Prophets, and then you have The Lady of Kingdoms and A Day of Darkness, all of which have great mojo behind them, and it's very enjoyable.
They're all full of hoodoo and voodoo, and
not so much the first book, but each book has successively gotten more hoodoo and voodoo-ish. It's great fun. Like, in all seriousness, the magic for the book is something I'm really enjoying because it's a faith soft magic, and so a large part of the books is how if you're properly religious, so
you uphold to your values.
if you uphold to your values, keep your promises, help will be offered to you, and you can actually you have all these devils running around, and if you ask, provided you are a noble and pure soul, you can simply ask these people to bugger off, and they'll have no choice but to bugger off, which is... So, in book one, Lucas was dealing with... who's the main character for A Conspiracy of Prophets, right? In book one, Lucas was dealing with the Poison Mother, which is basically a Nephilim or fallen angel, right? And she's, of course, way out of his weight class, but he says, yeah, I don't want to talk to you anymore, and she basically has to just walk out of the place because he's a good and noble soul for that point in time, and it was just... That's kind of how the magic system works.
And also another thing is that the magic was very, very light in book one. You had maybe one or two instances of it, and it has grown progressively more front and center without ever overpowering it, but it has grown over the series gradually more prominent, or you have more fantastical imagery and scenes of more fantastical items, and I have really enjoyed the higher fantasy elements that come with the later books.
But the magic is never, haha, I cast fireball at you. It maintains the
same feel and style of being quiet and more...
Yeah, like Lilith mostly exerts pressure on the world by infiltrating people's dreams and tempting them or trying to deceive them, which is a very large part of book three, which is not the book we're discussing, but still, it's that kind of magic.
Yeah, and it's vaguely interesting the way the magic just interacts with people and the people interact with the magic at their fingertips. And I don't know where I was going with that. I bumbled.
Well, I'll pick up the ball. The magic system is great. We have no idea where we were going.
We're lost chimpanzees.
Sailing in a storm-tossed sea.
Riding dolphins with sailor hats and eye patches.
You can have a sailor hat. I want a top hat. Everyone knows I am the dapper of those two of us.
Yes, you have a cane.
That I don't need, but I use it anyway.
Yeah. You use it to steer and to row.
Whatever works, I guess.
The book 4, The Conspiracy of Prophets, maintains the entire quality of the series. It remains extremely well written, very well paced. You introduce new characters, and the plot line focuses on the continuation of the first major crusade, and the siege and subsequent siege of Antioch. Is that what it is?
I believe so.
Of Antioch. It's one of the big cities in the...
Basically the most important siege and moment of the First Crusade.
And then you have Lucas, and Lucas is also dealing with his own issues while dealing with having visions sent to guide him and the Crusaders.
Lucas has an incredibly interesting story because being a Watcher, the Watchers are not each, but occasionally given gifts from heaven, right? And Lucas's gift is that of a seer, right? So he sees glimpses of the future and has the power via how he tells and explains these visions to others to change the course of events. So in this book, he is tasked with giving visions to the Crusaders and saving them from this massive...
Not really saving them, he's pushing them to redeem themselves, because when they take Antioch the first time, there's massive bloodshed and looting and all kinds of nastiness, which condemns them in the eyes of heaven, and Lucas's job is to warn them that they are officially condemned unless they redeem themselves. But Lucas's internal conflict for this is that he is ambitious enough himself and wants to be a soldier and to earn prestige and honor. But that is actively opposed to what the Watchers do and what he is needing to do as a seer.
And so it's really interesting because Lucas is a man of titanic willpower, and it really bites him in the ass frequently. But he basically sets himself against, or he tries to set himself up against both hell and heaven, because they're both vying for his soul at this point. Throughout the course of the book, it's unfortunate, but it's story arc, but he slides little by little closer to hell. And so Lilith becomes a greater and greater threat throughout the book as he descends further into the murkier side of his character.
And the ambition and the desire for revenge, which we won't touch on too much because it involves spoilers from book 2. Rather important spoilers.
Right.
And like Lucas's journey, while really well handled and really well paced and making logical sense and having cool moments and all that, was difficult to like because you have him acting these things, even though the author clearly sets out a path of the way he should be acting. So you have a character that's continually falling farther and farther from grace, and he's your main character, and that is hard to enjoy.
But once again, it is clearly as the author intended every step of the way. And so what this is important because it suggests that the author has a plan, right? And the author is sticking to that plan. So we still have some vague hope that in book 3 or 4, or whenever Lucas's story reaches its climax, that he's going to start making the correct choices. Problem is that throughout the entirety of book 4, The Conspiracy of Prophets, he only ever makes the correct choice when he's backed into a corner.
And compelled to by the forces of heaven.
But in each of those cases, he always chooses correctly, because it is a choice even then, and he frequently does choose to protect, right?
Yeah,
there is nobility to Lucas, and he's just angry and
vengeful and
has a goal set aside for himself that he's willing to do just about anything to achieve. And
I think some of that would have been fine. It's just when he does immoral things, like blatantly immoral things in pursuit of his own ambition, that it makes him unlikable, as it should. And it's just, he doesn't do enough, in part because many of the good things he does are absolutely forced or aggressively unwilling. He is constantly fighting tooth and nail against quote-unquote what he should be doing before eventually doing it. And that saps a lot of the quote-unquote brownie points he'd be beginning with the reader for doing these good things.
I agree, but at the same time, because a main character for the story, the second main character to the story is Emolata Lepuy, I think.
Lepuy.
And she is my favorite character from the book. She is a half-sister for a count, all right? And Lucas hates her brother with every fiber of his being because the count did him, like, not a little wrong, like talking down to it. No, it was a major, like, there was almost no forgiving this, right?
Yeah.
And this is a large part of where Lucas's anger and vengeance comes for, and the sin was so great that it actually buys Lucas a great deal of wiggle room in the reader's minds, because it is, okay, I understand how you're having trouble letting this go, and in your shoes, I'd be in the same place. So, and so Emolata, being this count's sister, nah, she's his brother, has has a great deal of this anger reflected toward her. But at the same time, she's a courageous character, right? Our brother gets wounded and needs to get retrieving to be pulled out of the front line. So she marches off to do that basically alone, no servants, in the middle of a war, right?
Not like active front lines, he's
in the
he's
medical
close-
tents right behind the front lines.
Yes. We just don't want to cultivate the impression of her walking into a battlefield.
No, but she is walking through a
Contested region.
right
territory.
with enemy soldiers tromping around the city. It's the city in rebellion, and so it is not a safe place. And she basically says, "All right, I'm gonna go by myself." And Lucas, who hates her, who hates the Count with every fiber of his being, grudgingly, so absolutely grudgingly, does the correct thing despite hating both of these people at this point. And so you understand the grudge, and it's one of those moments that you like Lucas because he knows it's the correct thing to do to escort her across the city, right? And this is Lucas, who hasn't slept in 3 days, hasn't eaten in 3 days, and just got out of fighting on the front lines so that he could deliver this message to her. Like, Lucas gets beaten down hard throughout the entirety of this book. The moment when he's at his healthiest is when he's starving and tired because an angel basically just came along and cured his gangrene or what have you. So he is never ever healthy throughout this book. And despite that, he is still a character of titanic will and power. So Lucas, you don't like Lucas, but he is a powerful character, and that lends itself admirably to making his story enjoyable.
I really enjoyed the character arc for Emelotta's brother, Everard Lepuy. It was really well handled throughout the course of the book, really well paced, with enough resistance and gradual, just the entire thing I really enjoy, especially with how his relationship with Lucas and his sister evolved, and just his relationship with the siege and with himself. It was probably my favorite aspect of the book, and Emelotta had a lot to do with that as well, but it was just such a perfect act of redemption for me.
It even has like a really nice climax that we don't, not necessarily super loud or anything, but you have just these two scenes where then Everard does his benediction, right? And it's a benediction he takes it on. No one suggests it to him. People advise against it, but he takes it on of his own volition and of his own idea, which is really important because then it shows it's a true act of penitence. And then he comes back and he's changed because of it, and he has a new title, and you have this dramatic character shift from where he started the series out in book 1, Wind from the Wilderness, to where he's now, to the point where Lucas is now the one talking down to him and being discourteous. Whereas Everard is this calm, very comfortable in of himself character that's always enjoyable to experience.
I also really like the way the angels are portrayed in this book. In the last couple of books, really, but it was particularly in this book, I really enjoyed how, like the one scene where it's hiding in the cobbles.
Yeah.
That was awesome for me. Like, so quiet and all that stuff, but still it was just, I really liked the way the angelic and even the devils as well are portrayed in the series and in this book in particular. Do you have anything else?
Just that the book explores medieval warfare exceedingly well.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that. I wanted to mention that.
The entire book takes place in a siege, right? And you are never bored by this because the book delves so deeply into what this means, how everything works, and the slow exhaustion of food, the starvation, the diseases. Eventually, people are walking through cities and there's just bodies everywhere because there's not enough room in the charnel houses to store the bodies. And it's like this hellish, just dystopian wasteland that comes across beautifully and adds a wonderful aesthetic to just really solidify how horrific a place this is.
but also just like the fighting elements and the way the tactics and the way battles are won or fought and gambles, and it's just an excellent use of medieval warfare, as you said, and very enjoyable. And you said goes into fine detail, and while that is true to some extent, it's not like we're counting every grain of sand. It's not nitty gritty, tedious detail.
Correct.
It's detail built into the scene and around the world that you passingly or are fed bits and pieces at the appropriate time, so you build up the vision and understanding of how the fighting is going. And it's just really well handled.
There's a lot about this book that's really well handled, but there's also a lot in the book that's going on, actually, and multiple plots and numerous character narratives. Like, every character in the book, every main character in the book has their own narrative, from Lucas to Evrard to Emolada to the various counts and barons leading the this crusade, to the extent that one count is slowly falling into darkness as he's fighting his rivalry with another count, and this count that's falling into darkness, he has this friend with the one truly benign character of the crusade, a bishop or a priest, right? A father priest. And this is like the one character who always says the right thing, who is kind of pure in all ways. He's an incredibly important balancing effect, because he's constantly advising reconciliation, do not go do war crimes, or basically any of those things. And he's a character you really like. But because of how this one count is slowly getting consumed by his rivalry, the cracks split, which allows the conspiracy of prophets to really take place, because Lilith wants something to happen, and Lucas is not doing his heaven-sent task of actually advising these crusaders, so she starts coming up with her own prophets to turn things south and to drag these crusaders further into darkness. And the conspiracy of prophets, and all these prophets vying for the Franks' attention, or the crusaders' attention, that is also handled really well.
Yeah. I think I would give in the book probably 4.5 stars, depending on the day. Extremely well handled, but also hard to enjoy at times.
Yeah, simply because Lucas is your main character, and it's difficult to watch a character that you mostly like
Fall from grace.
And he does fall from grace hard.
Not even fall, he walks on his own, which is part of the problem.
The book is an excellent display of how choices affect character in the story. The author consistently gives Lucas a choice between the path of heaven and hell, and Lucas consistently takes the path of hell, when he himself is the only deciding factor. As soon as you add a secondary character into the mix, as soon as Lucas is not choosing solely for himself, he will consistently choose the path of heaven, which is, once again, an incredibly important saving grace for him, but most of the time he's only choosing for himself.
Oh well, a tragic book that leaves us in a piddle of despair. He cried for weeks.
Yeah, we actually had to buy a boat to set our house atop it so that we wouldn't drown.
Yeah. Goodbye. Au revoir.
Very well, our future friends.